Before money, the tax collector did not come for your coins. He came for the harvest. Imagine a farmer beside the Nile almost 4,000 years ago. For months, his family has watched the river rise, spread across the fields, and retreat. They have repaired the canals, pressed seed into the mud, pulled weeds beneath the sun, cut the grain, dried it, and carried it home. The crop finally belongs to them. Then the officials arrive. One man measures the grain, another watches the scale, a scribe records the amount. Porters begin filling sacks that will not remain in the village. Some may go to a royal storehouse. Some may support soldiers, craftsmen, temple workers, administrators, or labourers on a state project. The farmer is not asked to produce a wallet. For most of ancient Egyptian history, minted coins were not the ordinary foundation of taxation. The valuable thing standing in front of the government is grain, and grain is what the government takes. But the cost does not end when the sacks leave. The farmer may also owe days of labour. He could be summoned to repair an embankment, move stone, dig a canal, transport supplies, or serve another public obligation. If his household has livestock, linen, oil, beer, or other useful goods, those too can become part of what authorities demand. The state does not need money from him. It needs the things money would have purchased. This is the hidden logic of taxation before cash. A modern government usually collects a general-purpose token and then spends it on salaries, roads, weapons, buildings, and supplies. An early government could shorten the process. It collected food to feed workers, cloth to dress them, animals to move loads, and labour to perform the work. The tax was not a claim on money. It was a claim on life as people actually produced it. The phrase taxes before money needs a distinction. Long before coins, ancient societies already had money-like systems. Barley, copper, silver by weight, and other commodities could express value. A debt might be calculated in a standard quantity of grain even when no grain changed hands that day. A merchant could price goods in weighed silver without using stamped coins. So, this is not a story about people who had no concept of value. It is a story about states that collected resources before taxation depended on cash. Coins would make value portable, divisible, and easier to collect from strangers. But governments existed before coinage. Palaces existed before coinage. Armies, temples, canals, granaries, and officials all existed before coinage. Every one of them consumed resources. Somebody had to supply those resources. Taxation was the bridge between a field and a palace, between a flock and an army, between a household's working time and a king's construction project. It began with a simple political fact. Rulers could command more than they personally produced. A king did not grow enough grain to feed every soldier. A temple did not weave every piece of cloth used by its dependents. An administrator could not maintain a canal alone. The people controlling the state had to draw small portions of production from thousands of households and concentrate them in one place. That concentration created power. Before a government could tax income, it first had to discover what income looked like. In an agricultural world, wealth was visible but uneven. It stood in fields, walked on four legs, hung as cloth, filled jars, or appeared as the labour of human bodies. That gave early states several choices. They could take a share of the crop, they could demand a fixed quantity from a household or plot. They could claim animals or manufactured goods. They could order people to work for a specified number of days. They could require communities to deliver goods collectively and let local leaders decide how to divide the burden. Or they could force defeated territories to send tribute, turning military power into a recurring flow of wealth. The boundaries between tax, rent, tribute, religious offering, and compulsory service were not always clean. A farmer could owe grain because he occupied institutional land, because a ruler claimed authority over his district, or because a temple was treated as the owner. To the household surrendering the crop, those distinctions may have mattered less than the cart leaving the village. But to the institution, classification mattered. It determined who owed how much, to whom, and under what authority. That is why taxes created paperwork, before paper was common. Ancient Egypt makes the process unusually visible. Agriculture formed the economic foundation of the kingdom. Grain was measured as it entered and left granaries, and scribes recorded transfers so administrators could calculate supplies. Produce could be reserved for taxes and salaries, while grain and cloth could also compensate workers. The tax came in as a crop and went out as a budget. There was no need to sell every sack for coins before the state used it. Grain collected from estates could feed people employed elsewhere in the system. Linen could clothe them. Beer and bread could become rations. A resource gathered in one place could sustain labor in another. This looks inefficient from a world of bank transfers, but it solved a problem cash could not yet solve. If few people used coins, demanding coins would force farmers to sell crops merely to obtain the object required for tax. By taking grain directly, the state collected the thing it needed from the people who produced it. Yet grain is a difficult form of revenue. It is heavy. It occupies space. It can rot, burn, sprout, spill, attract insects, or feed mice. A silver payment can sit in a small chest. A grain payment requires sacks, carts, boats, storehouses, guards, inspectors, and managers. The government must decide whether transporting the crop costs more than the crop is worth. This is why geography shaped ancient taxation. A village near a navigable river could deliver bulky produce more cheaply than a village beyond mountains. A state might establish local collection centres, move grain by boat, consume it near the source, or demand a different commodity from distant regions. Taxes could be technically uniform and economically unequal because transportation changed their real cost. Two farmers might owe the same quantity of barley. One lives beside the granary. The other must spend days hauling it. Their written liability is identical. Their actual sacrifice is not. The timing could be just as important. Tax collectors wanted grain after harvest when it was measurable and available. Farmers also needed grain after harvest for food, seed, rent, debt, trade, and protection against a bad year. Every sack had several possible futures. Eat it, plant it, repay it, store it, or surrender it. Taxation did not simply remove wealth. It decided which future use would be cancelled. If the state took grain that would otherwise have been eaten, consumption fell. If it took seed, the next harvest shrank. If it took surplus intended for trade, the household lost access to tools or goods. If it took reserves, one failed crop could become a famine. The rate alone could not reveal the burden. A demand that was manageable in a rich year could be devastating after drought, flood, pests, or war. This made crop assessment a political act. Officials needed some method of estimating production. Fields could be surveyed, harvests could be measured, local authorities could report household capacity. In Egypt, the behavior of the Nile shaped expectations because flooding determined how much land could be cultivated and how productive it might be. But the state never saw the harvest perfectly. The farmer had reason to hide. The collector had reason to exaggerate. The local official had reason to protect allies and burden rivals. Every measurement created a negotiation between what existed and what power could prove. Suppose a household harvested 100 baskets of grain. The official says the field should have produced 120. The farmer says insects destroyed 30. The scribe has last year's record. A neighbour has seen the crop. A landlord claims part as rent. A lender already holds a promise against the harvest. The grain is physically present, but ownership has become invisible. Several institutions may believe the same basket belongs to them. This is where tax systems could push households into debt. A farmer unable to meet a fixed obligation might borrow grain, deliver the tax, and promise repayment after the next harvest. The government receives its share on time, but the household carries the shortage forward. One tax season becomes two. If the next crop succeeds, the family may recover. If it fails, the debt compounds the tax burden. Livestock, land, tools, labour, or family security can be placed at risk. Tax collection and lending therefore grew beside each other. The state demanded resources on a schedule. Nature produced them unpredictably. Credit filled the gap, but transferred the risk from the government to the household. The collector did not wait for rain. The borrower had to. Mesopotamia reveals another side of this system. Taxation and administration helped make counting politically essential. Some of the earliest writing from the region concerned goods, rations, animals, workers, and institutional accounts. Writing was not invented solely for taxes, and early tablets should not all be treated as tax returns. But temples and palaces managed large flows of commodities, and that management demanded durable records. A spoken promise dies with memory. A clay record can outlive the collector, the farmer, and the king. Marks on a tablet could identify quantities, commodities, people, offices, and dates. Seals could show who authorized the transaction. A record could confirm that 10 units arrived, that 3 were distributed, and that 7 should remain. Once a government could preserve those facts, it could compare them. The village says it delivered 50. The warehouse recorded 45. The boatman claims 2 sacks were damaged. The storehouse holds 40. The missing grain is no longer merely gone. It has become an administrative problem with possible suspects. Taxation created a chain of accountability because goods passed through many hands. The collector was not necessarily the final user. Produce moved from farm to local official, from local official to depot, from depot to transport, and from transport to palace, temple, army, or work crew. At each step, somebody could steal, substitute, undercount, overcount, or claim loss. The scribe protected the state from its own tax collectors. That did not eliminate corruption. It made corruption measurable when the records survived and the supervisors cared to check. The rise of record keeping changed who held power. A warrior could seize a harvest, but a trained administrator could make the seizure repeatable. Scribes, surveyors, storehouse managers, seal holders, and local headmen became essential because the state depended on their information. The ruler at the top might command the system. The official holding the list controlled who the system could see. If your household was omitted, you might escape. If it was counted twice, you might pay twice. If an exemption was recorded, privilege became durable. If a debt was written, obligation survived denial. The first tax technology was not the coin. It was the list. Lists turned households into units, fields into measurements, harvests into expected quantities, and labor into days owed. This did something profound to society. People were no longer known only as members of families and villages. They became entries inside a state model. The model was never perfect, but it gave distant rulers a way to reach local production. Labor taxation extended that reach to time itself. If a government lacked money to hire 10,000 workers, it could require 10,000 households to provide workers. Instead of collecting grain and purchasing labor, it collected labor directly. This is commonly called corvée labor, although the precise form varied greatly across societies and periods. A person might owe a number of days each year, a household might send one member, or a community might receive a collective quota. The work could include digging canals, repairing dikes, maintaining roads, transporting goods, quarrying stone, building walls, serving military logistics, or working institutional land. From the state's perspective, labor tax had an extraordinary advantage. Human effort could not be stored in a granary. If the state wanted a canal dug, it needed workers at that place and time. A labor obligation delivered the service directly. From the household's perspective, however, the true payment was not merely the days absent. It was the work that could not be done at home. A farmer repairing a royal embankment was not repairing his own tools. A man transporting stone was not tending his field. A household that sent one adult lost part of its productive capacity and might have to redistribute work among women, children, older relatives, servants, or hired help. The tax collector took no grain, yet the next harvest could still become smaller. This makes labor taxes difficult to compare with taxes in kind. How many baskets equal 10 days of work? The answer depends on the season. 10 days after harvest may be inconvenient. 10 days during planting may be catastrophic. Ancient governments understood agricultural timing to varying degrees because they depended on the same harvest they could damage. Labor demands often had to fit around the crop calendar, but war, royal ambition, and administrative abuse did not always wait. A government could overtax labor without collecting a single extra object. The physical achievements of ancient states make the result visible. Canals crossed landscapes, walls enclosed cities, roads linked territories, quarries supplied temples and monuments. These projects required technical skill and organization, but behind them also stood enormous quantities of compelled or institutionally mobilized time. Stone is the part that survived. The tax was the missing day. Taxes in goods had their own monumental form, the granary. At Hattusha, capital of the Hittite Empire, archaeologists examined a vast Bronze Age silo complex with dozens of chambers. The facility covered an area comparable to a football pitch and once held hundreds of tons of grain. Scientific analysis indicated that separate chambers contained crops drawn from different farming communities, consistent with grain gathered through taxation and centralized by the state. The building was more than storage. It was political power made edible. Inside those chambers sat thousands of days of agricultural labor, removed from many fields and concentrated under royal control. The grain could provision officials, support specialists, feed soldiers, supply ceremonies, or protect selected populations during scarcity. The granary allowed the ruler to command time. A crop collected in autumn could feed an army months later. A surplus from one district could sustain workers elsewhere. A reserve could turn a bad harvest into political loyalty if the state released food when private stores failed. But storage did not guarantee security. The Hattusha silo was devastated by fire and abandoned. Centralization created a target and a single point of failure. Grain spread across thousands of households faced many small risks. Grain concentrated in one depot faced one enormous risk. The tax system exchanged local resilience for centralized control. Sometimes that control saved lives. Sometimes it made loss spectacular. Redistribution is often used to describe early economies, but the word can sound gentler than the process. Resources flowed toward institutions and then outward again as rations, wages, gifts, religious support, military supplies, or emergency relief. The people who paid were not always the people who benefited. A village could surrender barley that fed soldiers protecting the frontier. That is a recognizable public exchange. The same barley could feed troops conquering another village, builders raising a royal monument, or servants supporting elite consumption. Taxation was not automatically payment for public services. It was first an extraction made legitimate by authority, tradition, religion, conquest, land tenure, or force. The justification mattered because collection was expensive. A ruler could not station a soldier beside every field. Sustainable taxation required local cooperation or at least predictable obedience. Religion could present payment as an obligation to the gods. Kingship could present it as the natural order. Conquest could present tribute as the price of survival. Land grants could carry service obligations. Communities could accept levies in exchange for irrigation, security, access to land, or protection from worse demands. The most durable systems combined belief, benefit, and threat. They made payment feel inevitable before enforcement arrived. Ancient China offers a powerful comparison. In early imperial systems, households could owe grain, cloth, and labor service. The state received food, textiles, and human effort from an agricultural population, then used those resources to sustain administration, armies, transport, and public works. The combination mattered. Grain fed people. Cloth was valuable, portable, divisible, and useful. Labor moved earth and goods. A household was not taxed only because it possessed a pile of wealth. It was taxed because the state believed it controlled a portion of that household's productive capacity. Under the Qin and Han, increasingly standardized administration made households and land more legible to the state. Registers allowed officials to assign obligations. Strict demands for grain and labor helped produce extraordinary state capacity, but excessive extraction also created anger and instability. The empire could mobilize resources at a scale a village never could. It could also mobilize resentment at the same scale. Around the late first millennium BCE, Chinese states increasingly used coin payments for some obligations. One major reason a ruler might require a tax in coins was that the requirement itself created demand for coinage. If every household must obtain coins, people have to enter markets, sell produce, work for pay, or trade with someone who has coins. The state does not merely collect money, it pulls society toward monetization. This is one of the most important transformations in tax history. A money tax can create the money economy it appears merely to use. Imagine a farmer who grows millet but owes coins. He cannot hand millet directly to the collector. He must first find a buyer. If many farmers sell immediately before the tax deadline, prices may fall. Traders with cash gain bargaining power because the state has made farmers desperate for the same portable object at the same time. The official tax rate may remain unchanged. The market adds a hidden tax through bad prices. Under a grain tax, the government carries the risk of transporting and storing grain. Under a coin tax, the farmer may carry the risk of selling it. The burden has not disappeared. It has moved. Cash offered governments major advantages. Coins were easier to count, store, and transport than barley. They could pay soldiers far from the fields that supported them. They could purchase whatever the state needed instead of forcing administrators to predict the correct mixture of grain, cloth, animals, and labor. Money made taxation flexible, but that flexibility depended on markets. A sack of grain could feed a worker even if no trader appeared. A coin could feed nobody unless someone was willing and able to sell food. In a region with thin markets, collecting coins might drain the very medium people needed for exchange. In a crisis, prices could rise while tax obligations remained fixed. A money tax that looked modern could become more destructive than an old payment in kind. This is why the transition was uneven. Coins did not arrive and instantly replace grain, cloth, labor, and tribute. States mixed systems for centuries. They accepted money where markets were deep, goods where supplies were directly useful, and labor where projects required bodies more than revenue. Even coin-rich empires continued collecting some taxes in kind. The practical question was never simply, has money been invented? It was, what can this government collect most reliably, and what does it need to spend? Before money taxes, the connection was brutally concrete. The government wanted bread, so it took grain. It wanted cloth, so it took cloth. It wanted a wall, so it took days of labor. There was little distance between public ambition and private cost. That directness reveals what taxation has always been. It is not fundamentally the movement of money. It is the transfer of command over resources. When a government collects 1,000 coins, those coins represent the right to direct food, materials, land, machinery, energy, or human time. Ancient states removed the monetary middle step, but the economic event was the same. Someone produced, authority redirected, institutions consumed. The crucial issue was who decided, who benefited, and who carried the risk. The limit of taxation was not whatever the ruler could seize today. It was what allowed society to produce again tomorrow. That principle stands behind the farmer beside the Nile. The officials can remove every sack. They have guards, records, authority, and a royal claim. But if they leave no seed, next year's tax disappears. If they take the household's food, the farmers weaken or flee. If they demand labor during planting, the field produces less. A rational state must preserve the source of its revenue. A desperate or predatory state may not. The balance between extraction and survival shaped every early civilization, although the institutions, terms, and obligations differed enormously. No single model describes all ancient taxes. Egypt was not Mesopotamia. Hittite storage was not Chinese household registration. Temple dues were not identical to royal levies. Tribute from a defeated kingdom was not the same as labor owed by a farming household. Yet they shared one economic truth. The state could operate without taxing coins because the population's real wealth was never coined to begin with. It was harvests, herds, textiles, metal, land, and time. The earliest tax systems, reached directly into those forms of wealth. They collected the ingredients of government before currency made those ingredients interchangeable. In doing so, they helped create the conditions for money. Officials needed units to compare payments. Households needed markets to obtain unfamiliar obligations. Merchants moved collected goods. Scribes turned deliveries into balances. States later demanded coins, creating millions of reasons to earn and exchange them. Money did not simply modernize taxation. Taxation helped spread money, return once more to the harvest. The scribe finishes the record. The sacks are sealed. The cart begins moving toward a storehouse the farmer may never see. Part of his year is now traveling away from him. Inside each sack are days of ploughing, seeds saved from an earlier crop, water carried through canals, meals delayed, and risks survived. To the official, it is revenue. To the storehouse manager, inventory. To the soldier, a future ration. To the ruler, capacity. To the farmer, it is winter measured in grain. That is what taxes were before money made them look like numbers. They were not deductions from an account. They were missing animals, missing cloth, missing food, and missing days. They could build the canal that saved the next crop, or the monument that glorified one ruler. They could feed a defending army or an invading one. They could create reserves against famine or empty the household reserve first. Taxation allowed thousands of separate lives to finance a single collective purpose. The power to define that purpose was the real wealth of the state. Coins eventually made collection easier, but they did not change the foundation. Every tax still transfers part of what people can produce toward what institutions choose to do. Before coins, that transfer was visible in the dust rising behind a grain cart and in the worker walking away from his own field. The government did not ask him for money. It asked for the future his labor had created. And that was the economics of taxes before money.